Fashion can never be sustainable. Some agree with this statement and give examples to prove that, when designed thoughtfully and responsibly, fashion can be. Whilst this episode isn't written to focus on the semantics, I think it is important to note that the current scale of fashion production and consumption can never be sustainable for the planet and its inhabitants. Presently, witnessing large fashion corporations attempt to quote-unquote be sustainable feels to me like a box-checking exercise. To justify or to even celebrate these so-called milestones, sustainability milestones, is doing a huge disservice to the real change that needs to be put into solving fashion's issues of carbon emissions, waste generation, and labor exploitation. The list goes on. But what about businesses that are actively growing against the grain and the current? The ones that prioritize building long-lasting relationships with their suppliers, partners, and customers. These businesses naturally gravitate to genuine and factual sustainability communication to shift mindsets and also help us see the issues of the fashion industry as they are. Now, how many sustainable fashion businesses come to your mind? Off the top of my head, I can think of a few and a handful, but these businesses respect our interconnectivity and interdependence with nature and recognize the importance of equity. Their innovation, creativity, and also steadfastness in creating a business true to its values should be celebrated and also spoken about widely. This time, I thought I would switch things up slightly. The two guests I speak to in this episode and the next are founders of businesses that are no longer in operation. We don't often speak about or read about the moments where we realize that maybe it is time to shut down or take a pause on the business. Whilst not sensationalizing the closing down of a business and therefore livelihoods of its employees and various stakeholders in its supply chain, I wish to also ask, what is the bottom line here? What makes a sustainable fashion business that is built on the values of sustainability shut down? To a certain extent, this episode reminds us to examine what is it about the system that we have to fix in order for businesses growing against the current to nourish and to flourish. The first business, Shop Bettr, was founded by Chu Wong in early 2020. Chu wrapped up the business in early 2021, making the lifespan of Shop Bettr shorter than a year. Stay tuned to our next episode where you will hear from Rachel Tan, founder of Husto, an Instagram thrift shop that ceased operations in 2020. You might also otherwise know her as No Carrier Please on Instagram, an Instagram advocacy page that was active till late 2019. Now, let's hear from Chu. Hello, can you please tell us a bit more about yourself?
Sure. So, hi everyone, I'm Chu and my pronouns are she, her. I'm currently seated at my dining table in Munich, Germany, where I moved to from Singapore about 3 months ago in July 2021. I'm currently a sustainability consultant helping businesses measure, reduce, and offset their greenhouse gas emissions. And previously, I was the country coordinator of Fashion Revolution Singapore and the founder of Shop Bettr. So regarding what I'm wearing, I'm in an all-black outfit today. I'm in a silk button-down and black nudie jeans that are both about 10 years old. I'm wearing my watch, which is my daily companion for the past 5-6 years since entering my life. And I'm wearing earrings, which were redesigned from old gems from my mother.
Oh, that's so nice. Also, I like how everything that you said is so on brand. Like how you're in a full black attire. We are going to be speaking about Shop Bettr today, and I guess your experience as a person who used to run a quote-unquote sustainable fashion business. And yeah, I just wanted to ask you about why you started and ended your business and what Shop Bettr is, I guess, essentially.
Yeah.
Or was.
Yeah. So just to introduce Shop Bettr for those who aren't familiar with us, Shop Bettr was a fashion tech startup, and I built it to be a searchable, shoppable platform that brought together all beautiful products made by better businesses so that consumers could find sustainable alternatives to their shopping needs. So I kind of envisioned it to be like a list for conscious consumers. And I shared a lot about Shop Bettr's story in Shop Bettr's last blog post, so I'm happy to share it again for reware. For those who aren't familiar with us or haven't had the chance to read the post. So Shop Bettr was started in March 2020. I have been working in the sustainable fashion industry in Singapore for about 5 years at that point. And then particularly in my nonprofit work, I would meet so many people who kind of shared that they would love to support the sustainable fashion movement, but just didn't know where to go or what to do. So hearing this, I was always very excited to kind of share about the growing community of small businesses working to make fashion industry better. And I was doing this for years, sharing about the businesses and the creative fashion in a way that's responsible to both people and planet. However, I think over time, I grew quite frustrated because I think the impact was really limited by myself just being one person. And I really wish there was a more efficient way to connect these people to the small businesses that existed. So, and at the same time, while I was kind of sharing about these businesses with people who wanted to support them but couldn't find them, I knew at the same time through personal contacts that a lot of these same businesses were often not just struggling to grow, but they were struggling to even remain in business because of the lack of resources. That something that they would have if more people could find them and support them, right? So with Shop Better, I really set out to kind of bridge this gap to help the shoppers find the small businesses that are worth supporting, and to help the small businesses that reach these same shoppers and kind of grow towards stability. So that was the start of Shop Better. And the end of Shop Better was not too far away. It was by around December 2020, towards the end of the trial period. So a lot of my brand partners on Shop Better were on trial periods because I just wanted to figure out what the best business model would be. And so I put them on a trial period where they didn't have to pay any commissions yet, so I could try and figure out the numbers. And towards the end of these trial periods, a few things were becoming quite clear to me. One was that the numbers were not adding up. So unless I really get heavily invested in paid advertising, the unit economics were unsustainable based on our very, very low commission fees, which I had actively wanted to keep low because I knew our brand partners had very, very slim profit margins. So if I kept them low, they could have decent profit margins. And if I increased them in order to make my business sustainable, then they would have slim profit margins again. So that wasn't something I wanted to do. The second thing was that the business model didn't align with my personal values. So I was really averse to going down the heavy advertising path because I'm not personally a big fan of advertising. So realizing that I had to not only just base my business model on it, but to really engage with it on such a level where I would be driving potentially unnecessary consumption, that really made me very uncomfortable. And then the third reason was Shop Better was kind of founded to focus on small businesses based in Southeast Asia and Asia at large. And while I'm really most excited about this region when it comes to sustainable fashion, and I want to make a difference there, as mentioned earlier, I'm currently based in Germany. And so working on a business that's kind of halfway around the world, it's not only challenging, but I think it may also prevent me from giving myself a real chance to find my feet in my new home. And so that was why I decided to put an end to the journey for Shop Better.
Like you mentioned a bit earlier also that you had obstacles where you couldn't really personally agree with some of the potential sort of growth that you had to take in these directions and these strategies that weren't sitting very well with you. Were there also other sort of instances where you felt this dissonance when it came to daily operations, or also I guess the entire journey from the conception of the brand to wrapping the business up? Yeah.
I mean, before even starting the business, I already asked myself if by starting a sustainable fashion business, I would be encouraging more consumption, when the most sustainable thing that we all know to do is actually to consume less. And I mean, the answer to that is yes, right? However, what I noticed is that through my activism work previously, I realized that consumer habits, are one of the toughest things to change. And it would take a while before mainstream audience kind of grow into their identity as wearer of clothes and not just consumer of clothes, right? So in the meantime, consumption will still continue as it does today. And my take was that I would much rather the consumption that's already happening kind of goes towards products that are sustainably produced, both environmentally and socially, and helps support the small local businesses, rather than the bigger businesses that maybe I don't want to kind of support. And so that was why I decided to go ahead with it, despite at the beginning already knowing that it is a consumption-led business model, which is not entirely aligned with my values. But I felt that understanding the environment that we're in, this is the best that I can make of the environment we're in.
So it was
So, I mean, the goal was really to reach more mainstream audiences, to kind of slowly help them discover the world of sustainability through something that they were already familiar with first. So since they're familiar with consumption first, let's get them there, and then let's try and kind of move them through the journey and let them understand sustainability as a whole through that. But that was the goal.
Did you feel like starting the business was like, I guess, growing against the current in any way? Like, did you feel like there was change that was made through the brand or through what you were doing with Shop Better?
You mean for myself, for the ecosystem, for consumers?
I guess for everyone. But mainly, I think my question, I was referring to the ecosystem. Yeah. But feel free to point to any other aspects.
I guess for the ecosystem, my goal was really to kind of enlarge the slice of the pie that sustainable businesses would have.
Right.
So I did realize that with a lot of my brand partners that they were really excited by the idea because the problem statement was something that really resonated with them. And for many of them, actually, the conversion was decent. But I think at the end of the day, for my business to be sustainable, so it's really funny because actually let's see, how do I phrase this? It was working well for them, but it wasn't working well for me because then my business was not sustainable because I wanted their business to be sustainable. And by sustainable here, I mean like business financially sustainable. So it's really, it's a conundrum because I really like the idea of not having to rely heavily on monetary growth. But at the end of the day, we all have to pay bills and put food on the table. So it was a tough decision, right? Do I then not make it work as well for my brand partners, but then make it more sustainable for myself, or what do I do there? And so at the end of the day, I feel like it's also a bit of the system we're in that made it a bit difficult. Yeah.
Would you have done anything differently now, looking back?
No, because I think I stand by the commission that I had agreed with my brand partners. And I mean, like I said, the other option would have been to invest heavily in paid advertising, and that would have sat very uncomfortably with me as well. So to me, it was like both options to make the business financially sustainable were not options that were open to me. And I feel like this is something that's quite specific to me. I feel like if another person had ran the business, it would have been perfectly fine. But it's just, it went against my personal values. And I feel like there is no point in doing a business that goes against your personal values, because then why are you running that business? You know, like there's really no reason for that. Like, so I do think the business model still works. It just needs a different person who maybe is more comfortable with raising commission fees or more comfortable with paid advertising than I am, or where it doesn't go against their personal values. And I think the idea would still work. But for me, it was just, my identity isn't tied to being an entrepreneur or founder. So if the business model doesn't work with me, I didn't feel the need to continue for the sake of it.
It's interesting that you point towards that when you speak about like your personal identity and how Shop Better, I guess, was a part of your identity or like, yeah. How was it a difficult decision to come to like closing the business?
It was definitely very difficult. I mean, it was really quite the struggle to come to terms with my decision of what was right for the company versus what was right for myself personally, because like you said, Shop Better was just such a big part of me that putting it on hiatus really felt like I was just killing a part of myself, really. So it was very painful. And the time between like my subconscious realizing that what the right decision was, and my conscious like finally making that decision a reality, was actually a pretty dark time for myself personally. But I mean, ultimately I made the decision because it just wasn't healthy for me to run a business when I'm not 100% behind it, right? There are a lot of brilliant minds out there, and there's bound to be someone who is more suited to this business model than I am. and therefore they are more able to execute it better without the kind of mental burden that I have. And then that's better for, the business, the ecosystem, the business owner themselves. And I feel like that person doesn't have to be me. I can continue contributing to sustainable fashion through other avenues that are more suited to me. So that was how I decided to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite difficult to have this conversation without speaking about how the larger system is at play, and how it sort of affects, how it sort of sets the tone when it comes to starting a business, that like profit is still like right up there. Like it's so I can't help but ask the question. I don't know if you would have an answer for this, because I don't. But do you think a quote unquote sustainable fashion business, do you think it actually exists?
That's a real tough question. Let's see. I mean, I feel like there's no black and white, because I feel like we have to understand the kind of limits of our current system, right? So I think, is there a perfectly sustainable business, fashion or not? I don't think there is one, because I feel like the structures that we're in require us to extract resources regardless. So I mean, if you are a sustainable fashion business that sells new clothing, for example, regardless of how ethical your supply chain is or how environmentally friendly your materials are, be it recycled or organic or whatever, at the end of the day, we are still extracting resources that quite likely didn't have to be extracted. I mean, we realistically know that there is enough secondhand clothing in the world right now to clothe us over and over again and for the next few generations. So really, there's no need for new clothing ever. So if you're creating a brand new clothing line that happens to be sustainable, like, what's the real reason for it, right? But then again, it also depends on how you see sustainable. And if you look at, for example, sustainable fashion businesses that are looking at more the resale, rental, shopping market, then it's definitely sustainable that they are extending the lifespan of clothing that already exists. But then on the other hand, by doing this, are we also encouraging people who create clothing to say, but my clothes can be sold secondhand, so it's okay for me to produce more? So there's no perfectly sustainable business. But I think every business that is kind of progressing towards this sustainable journey is trying their best. So I wouldn't point fingers at anyone to say that you are not sustainable. I think everyone is trying their best, and it's just we have the limits of the structures around us. There are many small businesses that are trying their best to go against the grain, and that was what Shop Better was really trying to support as well, right? All these small businesses in Southeast Asia that were going against the grain when it comes to fashion production. And I really was hoping that more, sad to say the word consumer, but consumers would find them and then, shop with them, rather than businesses that really cannot give a 2 cents about about what's happening on the planet.
So then maybe the question that I should be asking is not if there is a sustainable fashion business or whether a sustainable fashion business exists. It's more of like, how do we help everyone, or how do we organize everyone to grow against the grain, right? To sort of like go against the system and how to resist capitalism, I guess.
I mean, I feel like to a certain extent, it's already happening a little. Like, you see it in like the small pockets of communities that explore a world beyond like economic growth / capitalism, right? I mean, you see mutual aids really popped up a lot during the whole COVID pandemic. I was really heartened to see that. You see a lot of small businesses that kind of sustain themselves through like an ecosystem of supporters, be it like B2B supporters or B2C supporters. You see a growing discussion of a just transition, which I think before the COVID pandemic was something that was super niche and no one would actually understand what it means. But nowadays, when you say just transition, I think a lot of people don't actually need to explain what that is anymore. But for those who don't know, it means that climate justice and social justice are kind of equally important, and you're not like subordinating them to one another. So I think we're really starting to see small pockets of communities appearing and supporting each other and going against the grain. I think the main challenge here is that we just need to kind of start implementing these ideas at scale, so that it's not just a niche discussion, but more people can benefit from these and then start to appreciate it. Because I think right now it's always seen as something that's quite young for the progressive people, but I genuinely believe that everybody can benefit from this. It's just that when it's so abstract and it's just something people talk about, then you really can't appreciate how it actually is then implemented and affects everyone's lives. So I think that's where the challenge is.
Right. Has running and subsequently, closing down the business changed the way you relate to, the clothes that you wear, or how you see the fashion industry or the fashion system as a whole?
I mean, I feel like I am and I will always be a participant in the fashion system, because I mean, simply by being a wearer of clothes, like all of us, we will always be part of the fashion system, regardless of whether we actively think of it or not, right? As long as you wear clothing, which every one of us does, then you're part of the fashion system. And so that part of my identity has never changed. I think what has joined it with time, even before Shop Better, was my identity as a fashion activist. So questioning the fashion system with a very loving eye, but still critical. And then when I was with Shop Better, it was more than looking at it as a business owner and trying to figure out how to align business and so financial stability or sustainability with my values as a fashion activist and as a wearer of clothes. So I think the only part of my identity that has dropped off now that Shop Better is in our history is that now I am still a fashion activist. I am still a wearer of clothes, but I am no longer, a fashion business owner. But with that in mind, I think nowadays when I look at fashion businesses of all kinds, I have a deeper understanding of how difficult it is to run a fashion business, and then to run a fashion business and trying to be sustainable on top of that, it's very tough. Yeah. So there's more appreciation. Yeah.
Right. So then, can you speak about what, Shop Better was / is / has become / symbolizes right now? What is it? What is it to you now?
Yeah. I mean, Shop Better was an attempt to build a support network within the sustainable fashion ecosystem in Southeast Asia. So I really wanted to allow supply and demand to meet so that the ecosystem could thrive despite the kind of challenges in our region when it comes to sustainability in fashion, right? And while it no longer exists, I think it's not because the ecosystem was not ready for it, which I think sometimes it's kind of leveled at the Southeast Asian region that we're not ready for sustainable fashion. But I think it was really because the timing was really challenging with the pandemic. A lot of businesses or brand partners that was onboarding, they were already struggling and trying to figure things out on their front. And then a lot of consumers, of course, were hit hard with the pandemic-linked recession, and so they had other priorities, understandably. And then on top of that, I feel like with the very consumption-driven business model, it wasn't a right fit for me as a founder as well. So I think personally, it was a great learning experience, and I'm really thankful to have had the opportunity to work on it. Otherwise I wouldn't have met you, for example.
Yes.
And yeah, so Shop Better for me was, now it's like it's part of my history and just a learning experience that I've gone through.
How would you want to see the conversation sort of shift or change, or what do you want people to speak about more or understand or realize?
There are two parts to this. So one, I feel like consumers of clothing or clothes shouldn't really see themselves as consumers, but they really should see themselves as wearers of clothes, because I feel like very often we kind of diminish our identity or our relationship with clothing to just consumption, which I think is very unhealthy and is the reason why we've kind of ended up in the mess that we're in today. There's a lot of ways that we can interact and engage with our clothing beyond buying Mending and swapping are two of my favorites. I'm not very good at mending, but it's still a lot of fun and it's very meditative. And I think we need to understand that our identity and our engagement with clothing really needs to go beyond consumption. If we want this entire ecosystem to be sustainable, right? And the second part of it is that I think there needs to be a lot more appreciation for how difficult it is to be a fashion business owner who is trying hard to be sustainable. I think a lot of consumers, one, they don't think about it. So they just go to their nearest fast fashion store and they buy something because they think they need something. And then if you were to ask them about, why don't you buy a sustainable version of it? The first question is like why should I care? Or like, why it's so much more expensive? How do you expect me to afford it? But I think, like, especially in a country like Singapore, a lot of us, we definitely earn enough to shop in a more sustainable way. I'm not saying that you should be buying 10 sustainable fashion dresses every year or whatever. But if you really like one dress, then you buy that one dress and you wear it to death, right? You don't see it as like as a disposable item or something that's trend driven, that's only gonna last in your wardrobe for a few wears. I think we really need to rethink the way that we view our clothing, and therefore appreciate clothing a lot more and appreciate the efforts of sustainable fashion businesses when it comes to creating clothing that have the quality to last in your wardrobe, have the style factor that would have longevity in your wardrobe.
Yes, we do. That's why we keep doing the work that we do, right?
Exactly.
Earlier, you sort of mentioned that you mentioned the business model and founder fit, that there was sort of like a misalignment between the two, for you and Shop Bettr. So I can't help but think that it's really hard to fit yourself into a business model that is sort of the business model that would thrive in this current system that we have. So a business model that prioritizes financial profit. Not that that's a bad thing, because you need this money to reinvest back into the business and also to pay your employees. But in a more, like, I guess, way that is like, say the biggest and the richest fashion companies right now are fast fashion companies and luxury fashion houses that produce at large scale. I guess my question is, sorry, it took a while to get to the question, but I think my question is, what is it about this system that we have to fix in order for businesses that are growing against the current or are trying to grow against the current to flourish and to be nourished? Like, how would you, I know this is not really, maybe it has to take some reimagination, but if you were to reimagine it, how? What
this
is it
tough.
about?
I think this is like the one question that everyone's trying to fix right now.
Yeah, I know. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, one of the biggest problems I see in the fashion system is the power dynamics. I feel like the reason why we end up where we are today is because a lot of the power that is in the fashion system is held by very few stakeholders, in particular, very few fashion brands and businesses. So, for example, I feel that the reason why they are able to have such ridiculously high profit margins is because the cost price per piece is so low. And the reason why the cost price is so low is because
there is exploitation.
Suppliers, exactly. The suppliers, the power dynamics are so skewed that the suppliers have no voice. They're not able to ask for more or ask for basically a decent price. And then this allows, of course, overproduction, right? Which then leads to the environmental side of things. So I think the power dynamics really need to be rejigged quite drastically. I see this with smaller fashion businesses that are sustainable fashion businesses, that they have a more equal relationship with their suppliers. Like, they see them eye to eye as a human being, correct? Rather than, and like, it's a business relationship rather than like own the power. You need to give me what I want because I have the purchasing power that you need, right? So I think the power dynamics in the fashion industry have to change quite drastically. So that's the one part with the business and the suppliers. But I think the other part is also the consumers and the businesses. I feel like a lot of consumers give up that power to businesses, and I don't understand why. Because at the end of the day, the purchasing power lies with us. Like, we choose with our money where we want to spend money. And I see that also, like, in my previous work when I was at a dry cleaning company, that sometimes some luxury fashion houses, just because they're luxury fashion houses, does not mean that their items are tip-top quality, right? Sometimes they do make mistakes. It's not their fault. It's normal for a business to make mistakes. And for example, maybe a dye isn't color fast. And like, we would back then tell consumers, hey, like this particular item, we've known it to have problems. You should bring it back to the brand. And the consumers would freak out because they're like, no, what do you mean I have to go back to the brand and tell them that there's something wrong with my clothes? Like, this is an expensive brand. I should not have, like the problem lies with you as the cleaner and not with the expensive brand. So it's almost as if you as a consumer feel like you don't have the right to tell the business that something they've created is not up to standard, even though you're the one who has paid them money. So I think the power dynamics of the consumer and the brands also need to change drastically. We need to understand that we are the ones who hold the power and not the brands. So I think the power dynamics in general needs to change.
I think this also speaks to the fact that the relationship between a brand or a fashion retailer to a consumer is so like you said, power lies in the hands of these brands. And when they are expensive and when they're aspirational and when they're branded as luxury, like, a consumer feels to a certain point maybe inadequate to speak up or to exercise their right as a participant within the industry or as a citizen, where they can voice their rights. And to demand for fashion brands to do better. But I think it also speaks to the converse side of things, which is that when a fashion brand sells clothing for really cheap, that is when wearers or when consumers feel like, okay, this is my turn to, like, get a deal, or like to and this is the mentality that sort of fuels the value chasing aspect of clothes buying, right, and of shopping, where you're like, okay, this is a discount, this is a good discount, this is a good sale, which is why I think fashion is so much driven by and fueled on discounts and sale festivals, or all these mad sort of double digit sale festivals. So I think I don't really know where I'm going with this, but it's just what I sort of what I thought of when you mentioned this power dynamic and also the sort of relationship between brand and consumer. And I think to sort of move away from this system that, yes, still exists and is still very much in power and are the overarching structures of how we work, I think it's also trying to reimagine different fashion spaces. So, like, beyond consumption, beyond sort of owning something almost, or having to go through this very conventional transactional relationship with clothes. It's trying to hold space and to create spaces for other ways of appreciating and consuming fashion. Recording this episode with Chu made things clearer to understand, at least for me. We have to ask, what can clothes wearing be and become when the mainstream fashion industry's goal is beyond making a profit to hand out paychecks to their employees and suppliers whilst ensuring environmental safeguards? The industry's goal in a larger system is to generate year-on-year growth. This then allowed for a very skewed power dynamic between brand and supplier that still exists today, the over-extraction of resources and an accumulation of capital within the hands of a very small number of people. In his book, Less is More: How Degrowth Will Save the World, economic anthropologist Jason Hickel writes that for a corporation, the money earned doesn't go to putting food on the table for Jeff Bezos. They go into expanding the company, buying out competitors, putting local shops out of business, breaking into new countries, building more distribution centers, pumping up marketing campaigns to get people to buy stuff they don't need, all to extract more revenue projection each year than the year before. He then points out that it is more than just greed. The reality of these firms and the CEOs who run them are subject to a structural imperative for growth. The Zuckerbergs of the world are just willing cogs in a bigger machine. Whilst I was doing research for this episode, I also got to speak to a business owner of a long time, now on hiatus, sustainability-driven fashion brand, and they pointed towards a similar point. They said, living off your brand is one thing. Trying to maximize profits from your brand is a different thing. The former means you have to set a profit margin as a target to survive, and any profit beyond that, you put it back into the business. So if it costs you $15 to produce a shirt, don't sell it at $90 because you'll be only limiting sustainability to it being a feel-good factor. If it remains to be a pursuit of a few, then you're not really trying to make a difference. I recall giving a presentation on corporate greenwashing recently when one of the questions posted to me post-talk was, and I paraphrase, what can small sustainable fashion brands do if most efforts targeted at communicating and practicing sustainability and being sustainable within the supply chain seem to be insufficient and inadequate? My answer then was that we cannot and shouldn't expect ourselves to be 100% sustainable, because no one is perfect and we need more people being imperfect than just a few trying to be quote-unquote perfect. Right now, I wish to add to the answer. And I think small brands shouldn't have to look to major fashion corporations for direction and solutions. To compare the efforts of an independent fashion business to that of the expectations of a large fashion corporation feels unrealistic and also very unnecessary. And to anyone who's wondering if a sustainable fashion business can exist within the current system, I am with you. The same business owner I spoke to also pointed out that there will always be a dissonance in running a fashion business. It lies between intentions and the current system that we live in. Running a business like theirs, they say, as much as it is about the products that they make and sell, because that is the nature of business, it is more of a statement of principle. The message they want to transmit with the business is that we have to change the way we consume things, then it will lead to natural growth. This is using the business as a vehicle that changes mindsets and highlights the issues that needs changing. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for sticking around, and also I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions on this episode and also the next. Stay tuned to the next episode that will be live in 2 weeks' time. Thank you.